Welcome to the Conduit Deeper podcast, a podcast that takes a deep dive into the details that surround our current sermon series, from current events to fascinating finds to conversations that take us deeper into the Word. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to our Deeper podcast. My name is Mo, Executive Pastor at Conduit Church, joined with our lead pastor, Darren Tyler, for a podcast into a new sermon series. You know, we try to just kind of trust the Holy Spirit to lead on which maybe book of the Bible we're going to go through on a particular season.
Yep.
So I'm just curious, why Jonah?
Yeah, why, right?
We're in the book of Jonah, minor prophet.
Yeah.
It's 4 beefy chapters.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you got 66 books to choose from, right? Like our goal would be to eventually, before I die, to have taught through all of them.
That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, it would be, right?
When you start keeping track of that.
But as I was in the fall, with all the stuff we were seeing in our nation, I just kept praying through, and so the first prompt was like, I feel like we should go through one of the minor prophets, right? They're the ones that were prophesying right before Israel's captivity.
Now, what makes it a minor prophet? Why is it called that?
Because it is the saddest of all the keys, D minor. Sorry, that was a very, very obscure reference. Anyway, so the minor prophets would be, well, I could have Dr. Easley correct me on this, but you got Isaiah, like the big ticket. So if we were on tour, these guys would be the opening act, playing with the lights up.
Yeah.
They still have great content. They just didn't have a lot of attention on them at the time.
Jonah, Nahum, Micah,
Obadiah, Malachi. Yeah. So, and I think we should just Google this, but I'm pretty sure it also has to do with like the size of their like prophetic imprint, the book itself.
Versus Isaiah, Jeremiah.
I mean, Jeremiah's like, it's a beefy, 30 plus chapters, then you got Jonah, which is 4. And so as I was thinking through that, what happened before Israel was taken into captivity was they were actually experiencing a season of like unprecedented, this was economic growth and also experiencing like expansion of their territory. So under Jeroboam II, there's like a quick succession of kings. Like I think it's 1 Kings or 2 Kings, chapter 14 speaks of Jonah specifically as one of those prophets that was prophesying during that time. But what was interesting to me and what I feel like the Holy Spirit was leading towards was Jonah's the only prophet that was actually called to another nation, which is really a fascinating.
So was he a prophet or was he a missionary? He
was a prophet, right? But called to Nineveh.
Yeah.
And what was intriguing to me is it fits so much with what we do, because on the one hand, so Assyria is where he was called to. That's where Nineveh was located. It's a great city, 3-day walk through it in Assyria. The Assyrians were brutal people. Like they went conquer with fear, right? So skin people alive, bury them in the sand, nail their tongue into the ground, and let them die. Like the ways they came up with to torture people was unbelievable. And so our modern maybe equivalent would be radical Islam, like Iran hanging people in, public executions, ISIS, cutting people's throats on video. Like there's this people, and the Assyrians would fit more into that category than than many others. And so we have a couple of choices, which is for a national, like our national position is we definitely need a military presence with it. But what we've learned with ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all the Islamic radicals, is that you can't bomb an ideology out of people. They can only repent their way out of it. And so while the government's doing their thing, God, and God ordains governments, that's clearly throughout Scripture, but he also has ordained the church for something as well. And for us, it's to go and preach against the wickedness of the city. So it fits where we are right now, which is where, so Israel, economic growth, expansion, and an increase in wickedness in Israel and godless and idolatry. surrounded by other nations, that God would ultimately, because 150 years later, spoiler alert, God is going to use Assyria to invade and take Israel off into captivity. So God is giving Israel time to repent. He's giving the Assyrians time to repent. But ultimately, the consequences were there. And I wanted to go through this. I felt like the Holy Spirit was saying to us as a church, it's not time to rest. We have a president that is doing things that do align with our morals and principles. But we're still a country that is very much gripped with wickedness, very much gripped with idolatry. And so we don't get to rest in that moment. We have to, we get to be a part of a voice of reason, destroying arguments, and honestly just praying for a time of repentance that God might forgive our nation.
You mentioned on Sunday, modern day Nineveh would be essentially Mosul, Iraq, which is literally the middle of nowhere. I looked it up on a map on the Google Maps. Just zoomed in and then zoomed all the way out. It is in the middle of nowhere, Iraq desert.
Yeah,
there's nothing except one big river.
Yeah,
flows through there.
The Tigris.
Yeah, the Tigris River down into Baghdad.
Yeah, a very biblical part of the world. The Tigris and the Euphrates both flow through Iraq, the Middle East.
And so what I didn't realize, and I don't know if it never really connected the dots until this weekend, honestly. It's kind of embarrassing. Because the story of Jonah and the whale, you would think that Nineveh was near water.
Yeah.
The ocean.
Yeah, right.
Because it talks about the fish in the sea.
Yeah.
There isn't one even remotely close.
Not even kind of.
Not even remotely close to Nineveh is a body of water.
Yeah.
Except for a river.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, well, what about this whale we're talking about? Like, yeah. So there's more to the story, obviously, we're going to get to over these next few weeks. But like the context of it is like Nineveh's not like a port city.
No. But that was the point. Like he went as far as he could the other direction.
2,500 miles, I think I've read.
Yeah. Like that was the thing. Once he washed up on shore, he wasn't almost to Nineveh. Like he had a long way to go to get there. Because the way sometimes if you don't know the geography, and it's one of the benefits of travel, right, is you're like, oh, that's really further away. Or in many cases, that's a lot closer than I thought. But yeah, he would have washed up on shore, probably somewhere along the west coast of Israel, Lebanon, modern day Lebanon, and then have to travel, which would have taken probably months to get there.
Wow.
It wasn't an easy journey by any means, and then he just made it more complicated.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
By going the other way. But that's one of the lessons, right? If you want to run from God, sin will always provide you the ride. And sin gave him a ride in his disobedience that God, in his grace, brought him back to where he's supposed to be.
You mentioned not resting in this time, this season that we're in here in America and globally with the new president, someone new in charge. And President Trump is not resting. His administration is not resting. They are so busy. The amount of things that have happened in the past 2.5 weeks is jarring.
Unprecedented.
I'm trying to put it into words maybe, and I'm looking now here to see if I can find a list of all the things that have been either executive orders or accomplished or put in place over the past 16 days or however long it's been. Every single day, the news cycle is just flooded with new items that have been, again, put in place or things that have been removed from federal government. In the past 48 hours has probably been one of the largest amounts of money that's been not seized, but a timeout has been called.
Yeah.
On one of the largest departments of the federal government. And that is something called USAID. USAID.
Yep.
Speak to that a little bit. I know we may have touched on this in the past briefly, but I don't think very many people know what USAID is.
Yeah.
What it's for, where the money is supposed to go, how it's funded, but it's the leading topic on the news, mainstream media right now.
That is the right question, because the hand-wringing of the progressive media specifically is focusing on the good that USAID does, and that good is providing food, refugee camps. So there is good that happens from it, but it is cloaked, and intentionally so. It was founded in 1961 by John F. Kennedy, and the idea was we want to sort of counter Soviet influence in the world, and the other prong of that is that the way we do that is the economic stability of other countries benefits us. So on paper, that actually sounds like a great idea, right? That if the more stable Haiti becomes, the fewer refugees are trying to get into our nation is sort of the idea. But in those days, it was about communism. And so what's happened is, like any good government organization, once you give it the power, it doesn't give it back and only expands like cancer. And so the initial attention, and by the way, there's a whole, if you want to go down the rabbit hole, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, this written by a former CIA operative, that USAID was a front for multiple, and continues to be for multiple CIA initiatives in the world. So here's what I would say. I've been to Haiti. I have seen what USAID has accomplished, or let me rephrase that, what they have not accomplished. After the earthquake, when we were down there building homes for people as a church, and by the way, millions of Christians, or I should say millions, hundreds of thousands of Christians over the years have been helping in Haiti. We were spending $8,000 to $10,000 to build concrete, permanent structure homes to replace those that were lost. USAID was building plywood shacks that they were spending $5,000 each on, and I promise you, it was not $5,000 worth of shack. So I don't know who was getting the money for that, which contractor it was. But anybody that's been to Haiti or any of the Caribbean islands know that if you're building something out of plywood, it's a tent made out of wood. It's going to collapse. So anyway, they've wasted all that money there. But the bigger issue to me is not just the wasted money, which is 100% factual. It's that in recent years, since specifically the Obama administration, they've used this as a wedge to send DEI initiatives around the world, like diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if you're in the Dominican Republic and you will not change your definition of marriage to fit same-sex marriage and gender ideology from left-wing progressives, they will literally cut the funding from it, which happened in the Dominican. It's happened in Uganda. It's happened in Kenya. Like in order to receive this money, you have to acquiesce to certain things that they say. And then what I've loved is that they actually have listed some of this. I think it's actually on the White House homepage right now. Let me find it. Here's some of what they found already that they have wasted in the USAID. $1.5 million to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in Serbia's workplaces. Serbia, right? We're going to help. $70,000 for a DEI musical in Ireland. $2.5 million for electric vehicles in Vietnam. $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia. Would have probably paid to see that. $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. My point is that while the hand-wringing of, Omar and some of these Congress and senators that are, because of all the good, they're completely ignoring the waste with it. Like, I would love for our country to be helping in specific ways, alleviating suffering. But attaching your agenda to it, it's like what they've done is they've turned it into a missionary organization, but the gospel of DEI is the gospel, which is identity politics. It's about forcing, the redefinitions of marriage, redefinitions of gender. And of course, when they talk about, parenting, they're specifically talking about abortion. When they say birth control, what they really mean is that they want to make abortion available to women around the world.
I want to back up a few steps. Did you see how they've come across this? So this is them figuring out that so much of the USAID money is, for lack of a better word, misappropriated and bogus. This is findings from the DOGE team.
Yeah.
Department of Government Efficiency?
Yeah.
Did you know that one of the leading guys that is on this team is from Nebraska?
I did not know that.
Dude, check this out. This is unbelievable. This kid's name's Luke Ferrator. He's 22 years old, and he's one of the leaders on the DOGE team.
Interesting. Code kid? Okay.
AI. They picked him up from Nebraska University, University of Nebraska. And because he won some huge competition over this past summer, figuring out how to read these scrolls that were burnt at Mount Vesuvius.
Yes, that's the same kid?
Same kid. Elon picked him up, snatched him. He's brilliant.
That's hilarious. I 100% know about that. Like, that was crazy.
Yeah. So this is what they're doing. So Elon and his crew have been going around snatching up these 19, 20, 21 to 24-year-olds and are putting them on the front end of diving into, like, deep dive using AI technology to figure out where these funds are going and who they're attached to. Like, it's unbelievable. The top 4 guys, I think I found this yesterday. There's these 4 guys. They're all between 19 and 22 years old that are at the tip of the spear for DOGE.
Wow.
And they're uncovering stuff. And they're actually having more authority than congressmen because they're basically telling them, the gig's up, you've been found out, here's the report, this is where the money was supposed to go to, this is where the money actually went to. All the receipts, they're digging a digital footprint. It's pretty wild. I just thought it was interesting that one of these kids is from your neck of the woods in Nebraska.
Yeah, you don't find a lot of coders in Nebraska because they're busy like throwing bales of hay with dad all summer. So it's not like they get a lot of time to sit around and code.
It's really interesting.
Huh.
And so, I mean, what they're finding is, there's $40 billion annually runs through USAID.
Yeah.
USAID. $40 billion every year. So January through December, 40 billion with a B. And then again, the next year, 40 billion with a B.
Yeah. And
every year.
The government is the only place in the world besides legacy media where they would use the word only and 40 billion in the same sentence.
Right.
Like, that's one of the main attack points is, well, isn't it only 1%?
Yes, 1% of the federal budget.
Yeah. 40 billion. To put that in perspective, that's about $1,300 per taxpayer in America that could be saved. So when you think only, and then you put it in that amount, like $1,300 of my tax money is being spent on condoms in Gaza. Like, I'll bet even the Gazans were shocked about that. Like, we don't need that much, millions of dollars worth of condoms over here. But
yeah, and you also mentioned that it's been kind of a shadow account for the CIA to do whatever they want. So that's come to light in the last 24 hours too, where the Trump team and the DOGE team is offering a buyout of the entire CIA workforce. Every single one of the CIA team members have been given the opportunity to resign with 8 months' pay. They are cleaning house, effective immediately.
I wonder how many will take it.
I don't know.
It depends on how many of them feel like they're activists,
Right.
Now, that said, most secular activists I know, they're activists, and as long as they're getting paid, right? And so as long as they're getting paid, maybe an 8-month severance would be enough to get them out of there. But
it's unheard of what is happening. But to try to get it back to, Jonah, it's the times, the sign of the times, right? And who we are in the story in this season in 2025.
Well, so to get it back to Jonah, but get it, it's, again, continuing to synthesize in with what we're experiencing in our modern life is that most left-wing, hardcore, progressive, secularists, they view us as Christians and accuse us of colonialism. We're colonizing with our ideology. And when you look at the work of not just USAID, but the U.S. government in general, the colonization is still happening, but with an ideology. And that's what the Obama administration began. It's what the Biden administration continued, which is they're taking their gospel of diversity, equity, and inclusion, again, sounds great on paper, but the way that which maybe that's what's so frustrating to me that makes me want to just like punch my TV, is everybody wants diversity. I want equity. I wanted to be included as a kid. I want inclusion, right? But forcing it by dividing people into people groups and then giving this specific group of people a special privilege or class based upon a quality or a trait like their gender or their race, as opposed to merit, it's not only what Martin Luther King did not have in mind, it's what the Bible didn't have that in mind. And the ultimate diversity, equity, and inclusion will only come when Jesus returns, right? That's it, because it'll be based on truth. It'll be based on love, not on power and totalitarianism. So it's like an antichrist spirit in place of Christ, anti meaning in place of in the Greek, of we appreciate Jesus's enthusiasm, but we're going to do this our way. So they're missionarying, colonizing in that way. So it's basically colonization for thee, but not for me, in the words of Josh Howerton's tweet, which got retweeted by Elon Musk yesterday.
Yeah, our buddy Josh down at Lake Point in Dallas.
Yeah,
pastor friend.
Yeah, I'm so doggone proud of him.
He's been taken to Twitter, talking about some of the same things we're talking about.
Yeah,
shining a light on some of this.
Yeah,
and Elon saw it somehow and retweeted it. And so, Josh's initial tweet as of the beginning of this recording was up to 6 million views.
For real?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
He was just calling to light these things, these DEI initiatives tied to Christian organizations for funding, which was catapulted during COVID.
Oh, yeah.
Because of a lot of the PPP stuff.
Oh, bananas.
And, it's kind of once the toothpaste is out of the tube, once that check keeps coming, it's hard to cut it off. I did a little digging. I don't know if you want to go down this, but I found the top 10 NGOs funded by USAID over the past 10 years.
Let's do it. Won't that be fun?
It's interesting. I think there's some familiar names on here. The number one funded USAID non-governmental organization was the Catholic Relief Services, $4.6 billion. Now, the Catholic Church has kind of fallen in line with some DEI initiatives, have they not?
I don't know if you've paid attention to the Pope, lately, like last month, he's talking about all gods are the same God and all they do. Like, are you serious? Because, that's been literally the Pope's gig for thousands of years has been to be the voice of God, right? That's a whole other false ideology and religion. But, yeah, my understanding of how DEI initiatives have worked, by the way, this is before we even knew it was called DEI.
Yeah.
Was that they would attach government funding to you acquiescing to government ideology. If you remember when we were offered the PPP loans as a church
during COVID,
I was so proud of our elder board because I was tempted because I didn't know what was going to happen and people's jobs were on the line, And I'm over here running my mouth, right? Well, you are too, about COVID. So in May of 2020, it was not immediately obvious that was going to be a financially viable option for people's livelihoods in ministry. But we still unanimously rejected the PPP loan for multiplicity of reasons. But if I were to simplify it the most, is that I want the government. I don't want the church out of government, but I want the government out of the church. That was the establishment clause. And the last thing I want is a hook in us from the government that can say, and now you have to do X, Y, and Z, or you don't get, your loan, or you don't get your money back. And I had a front row seat to this in the early mid-2000s because the Bush administration put in place what they loosely referred to as faith-based initiative, which was previous to that, Place of Hope, which I've 20 years of serving on the board of directors, 22 years now. If for them to receive, so I think at one point it was 2/3, it's much less now, of our budget there came from George Bush's, President Bush, faith-based initiative, which was before that, if you were a Christian organization, you were not allowed to receive government help because you were Christian, period. So Bush comes in and says, man, Christian organizations are doing some of the best work on the planet. We should cut that out. So that became a source of funding. And by the way, I'm not only not opposed to that, I think it's a great use of government money. Because otherwise, the government money coming into like addiction treatment centers, in regular organizations, I mean, it's a giant cesspool of waste. But with this one, you get to see local charities like that in action, helping specific people. Like that was a great use of government money. But then the Obama administration comes in and they start waving the sword of you have to change your definition. They were threatening the Catholic Church with this. Change your definition of like you have to offer not just birth control, but abortion services, right? If you're going to receive any more government funding, you have to include that in the United States. Now, fortunately, the Catholic Church had enough power that they pushed back on those basic things. And to this day, we still, at Place of Hope, receive government funding, but we also know that it is at risk every year because some guy could come in and with a swipe of a pen say, yeah, we don't want Christianity involved in that anymore, which was very much a very real possibility during the President Obama's era. That said, if you're in Uganda, you don't have the power to push back against that, right? You just don't. And so they force these ideologies on other nations in the name of goodness. It's cloaked in virtue, which is the worst kind of wickedness, is dressed up in goodness, and forcing nations like that to change their entire thousands of years of human history. And but you can't do that anymore because we have decided that a boy can be a girl.
I'm just going to read through some of these. We can talk.
Oh, yeah, we're still talking about the organizations. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I've got a question after it. It's FHI 360, which I've never heard of.
No, not
they
either.
were number 2, $3.8 billion over the past decade. Population Services International. One that I have heard of, World Vision International.
Yeah.
Number 4 on the list.
Yep.
I did not realize that they were receiving a large portion of their budget was from.
Yeah. Do you remember a few years ago when there was a big brouhaha because World Vision had changed their policy to become an affirming organization as far as sexuality on their, as far as their staff goes, offering benefits to same-sex couples, and it caused a pretty big storm. This has probably been 10 years ago, maybe more. Do you remember this?
What's interesting is I did a little digging on that, and I found out that one of the guys on the seats on the bus at USAID was the VP at World Vision at one point too.
Yeah.
So you can just draw a direct line.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to work very hard to connect the dots.
Yeah. Well, and to be clear, World Vision does good work.
Yeah, and so that's kind of one of my questions, though, is like, okay, they're pulling these funds. As of yesterday, they clicked the button off on USAID funds across the globe. So $40 billion just stopped.
Yeah.
So what is the impact on those organizations that actually need it, or on those communities that are actually using it for good? Like, what's the other side of the coin? How does this play out?
Well, first of all, as far as I understand, I understand the way it works. And by the way, the money for Place of Hope does not come from USAID. I want to be very clear about that.
Good distinction.
Yeah. But the way that funding happens is that it is allocated on an annual basis, not on a monthly basis. And so depending on where they are in their budget.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's January.
So we've turned the faucet off, but if the funding has already been sent or is being sent, whatever, but if not, if they haven't received their annual allocation, then it's going to be an immediate source of pain. And, should he have used a blunt force instrument like canceling the whole thing? There's an argument to be made that he should be using a scalpel instead of a chainsaw, but I don't know how. I don't know how you do it otherwise. Like, how do it's pretty easy to go through right now, apparently with AI, and find the crazy and just start chopping that stuff off. But you have to, when there's that much money involved.
Yeah, I was reading yesterday about this is really an accounting assessment. And so somebody was explaining this run corporations before. They were basically saying that what is happening right now is the U.S. government is going through what's called a ZBB oversight, zero-based budget, which apparently is a regular term when someone comes into an organization that is in a major deficit, assesses and runs a ZBB process. So everything's zero-based budget. So you just trim all the way down. Just use the chainsaw.
Yeah.
You get it all the way down, and then you build it back in.
Yeah.
Reverse engineer it for those things that actually are working.
Right.
So they were explaining like this is going to be super painful for all of these organizations for this next however long this is going to take. And that some may get restored, maybe not to the full extent that they're used to, but it's just super painful up front. And this is what Elon is spearheading technically because, I mean, he's running major corporations and he's used to this and somehow knows how to find the bottom dollar, the bottom line to make it profitable.
Yeah. So to that end, it's like we as a nation are $37 trillion in debt. And we're all sitting around acting like that ain't a big deal, right? It's like playing music on the deck of the Titanic. Like, I don't know what happens next. Like, this is unprecedented in human history, $37 trillion in debt. And the only way anybody who's ever ran a business, operated a church, you know this because you run the finances here, that it's easy to keep adding on expenses, right? Just like say like subscriptions to like a software, for instance. You get this department with one and this department with one. Like it's, these seem like little expenses, but you start to add them up, right? And they add up. It's just like your own personal budget. How many subscriptions have you got on your phone, that you've forgotten about? Like that's half of the thing that some of these apps are counting on is you just set a subscription and forget about it. That's their entire business model. Yeah. So somebody at the government level, we're talking billions of dollars, like we have to start somewhere. For our nation to survive, we have to start somewhere. And it's the wringing of the hands is legitimate in some ways because there are definitely people who will suffer because of this. And the question is, who's at fault? And I would suggest the fault is of Congress, who has been voting for this pork, whatever they call it these days, for decades without any repercussions at all. Everybody comes in, they vote for their own stuff, for their own people. They don't want it to be cut, and it just gets bloated and bloated and bloated, and it requires somebody to do, and who knows whether this even works, right? Because we're only 2 weeks in on this. But if it has any chance of working at all, it has to happen like this, where someone comes in with an axe and says we've got to cut this back here, cut it there, and then build it back.
But it again reinforces the idea of the Acts 2 church, right? Like it puts the onus. It should put the onus back on the church, the Christians,
right, to
serve our communities and serve the families within our communities, like from the inside out,
right.
And that was the whole idea, and that's why I'm grateful for our church. We see a need. We target it. We're very strategic. It's very lean. It's not bloated. It's a 1-to-1. We see a need. Figure out how to address the need. Have people partner with us. Tackle it. It's very efficient. And that's been our heartbeat, and that's been our goal.
Right. And we don't redefine words so that we can squeeze more into what we call our mission budget. So, we don't send out a postcard mailing but call that outreach. Yeah. Right? Which is a lot of what we've seen in the government thing is they've got one thing defined as this broad sweeping, so USAID is helping this, but you find out this morning, you sent me the tweet that the news organization Politico received $8.1 million from USAID, and we're just scratching the surface on it. In the church world, that's the equivalent of us saying, hey, we're going to hand out water bottles at an intersection with our church name on it, calling it outreach, but what we're really doing is marketing the church, but we're calling it something else. As a church, we've never done that. Will not do that. Outreach is actually outreach. We're not changing definitions for it so that we can, hide numbers to make us look like we're more than we are. It turns out when you don't keep secrets, it's pretty easy to be transparent, right? And, Godspeed to other churches that are figuring all that stuff out, but that's where we've been with it. And we continue to believe that the gospel is the solution. And our role in the church is clean up the messes, right, that the government leaves behind, and to hopefully influence government to make less messes in the process of it. But I look at this on the big picture and say, everything we're seeing right now as far as the influence of USAID is a direct result of Christians for the last few decades withdrawing from politics instead of engaging in them. Because, again, when we did that, the godless people took over, and godless people promote godless ideologies. And godless ideologies is exactly what USAID has been pushing, cloaked with a bag of rice.
Greed as well, at the forefront. And we've seen this play out a lot in the past year, and I think it's why it's magnified. I mean, through the hurricane out in Appalachia country.
Yep.
Thankfully, we have some people in charge now that are sending immediate help, sending funds immediately, sending equipment immediately to get this thing cleaned up. Same out west in California.
Right.
It's been tied up in government bureaucracy. And we have someone else in charge, a whole new team that is reallocating funds and equipment exactly where it needs to be efficiently. And, the church has been boots on the ground. And we've talked about this a bunch. And I just think hearing all of this in the news right now and today, yesterday, probably tomorrow, of all of these things being uncovered, it's I don't know, man. It just feels energizing to know that the church, apart from all of that, is getting the work done. We don't need that government oversight. Like, we just have the freedom to be able to meet the need at any moment with boots on the ground, at a moment's notice, nimble, flexible, to the point. That's just, I don't know. There's something energizing about that, knowing that we have that capability as the church, big T, big C, across the country, across the world.
Haiti, 2010, when the earthquake hit, the UN was supposed to be launching into action. The media, everybody was heading to Haiti, and so what the government did, and I say government, also the UN, specifically the UN, funneled everything into one giant account. They would organize people into, and I use the word organize very loosely, into soccer stadiums and make everybody. So you would see lines of people waiting for hours and days for just simple food that would then inevitably run out because they didn't have the infrastructure for it. That's the tale of the government assistance. And then on the other side of the island, where the UN hadn't gotten yet, so we were running an illegal operation, technically illegal. We would bring food in, churches from all over America sending food to Haiti, sending supplies to Haiti, bringing it to the ports of Jacmel. And Jacmel would then, pastors would show up, pastors would load their pickups, take their pickups back to their churches and distribute that way. It was literally like its own little Amazon distribution center. We ran it like that for probably 30 days before the UN showed up and attempted to shut us down.
Wow.
Turns out we don't really listen.
Why would
the government?
Why would they want to shut you down?
For safety. It's always that way, right? Oh, it's for your own safety, for the safety of the people.
What's the real reason?
Control. I mean, I'm ascribing I don't know how you ascribe a motivation to the UN, but what they did was put people in a soccer stadium. They built a tent city inside of a soccer stadium, which then ended up being they couldn't help everybody, so people. We saw the images on the news of people. You're 3/4 of the way back in line, and all of a sudden there's no food, there's no water left in the truck. So it's causing riots. It was causing destruction because it was all centralized. But the decentralized power of the church is something that is highly underappreciated. With this, like, it's decentralized, not centralized. The more centralized you get, the more bureaucratic it gets because you're using giant sweeping policies that may not work in one city or another to try to apply to everybody.
Can you cross-reference some of this with the Red Cross? I don't know enough about Red Cross other than what I've heard. It has some negative press. But man, they get a ton of TV time.
Oh,
Every NFL game this year since the hurricanes, they have a commercial or a blurb and a link and a QR code coming in and out of timeouts for almost every NFL game. They've partnered with the Red Cross. So during the Hurricane Helene and then LA fires, it's been a Red Cross wave of PR
every time.
And I'm curious to know, if it hasn't already, does that intersect with USAID? Are they separate organizations? Will there be a light shown on Red Cross in general? I'm just curious.
I would be shocked if Red Cross is not on the list of recipients for USAID. Shocked.
Okay.
The question with Red Cross is they do good. Maybe it's the question with all of them. They do good, but how much corruption are you willing to put up with in the name of good? Like how much – there's no such thing as a zero corruption game. We actually pay bribes to get stuff into countries, okay? So that is corruption that we have to – it's just part of the cost of doing business. You know, what are you willing to put up with? Is it, 0.5%, 1.0, whatever it is?
You mean this getting funneled to other places that shouldn't be – Correct. Or they're skimming off the top.
Correct. So with Red Cross, it's a bloated organization that is massive, and they do good work, but at what cost? And no, that's the part where you're not allowed to ask those questions.
Yeah.
But I will say this, if you ever see, this is to me, if you're looking for red flag, if a bunch of celebrities are tripping over themselves to get on TV to talk about it, you probably don't give to that organization. You just don't.
The number, I've read this yesterday, and there's information coming out so fast. So everybody, feel free to fact check. But the number 2 organization, not an NGO, but the number 2 organization receiving funds from USAID, corporation, Pfizer, number 2. So a lot of the celebrities and athletes that were doing commercials past several years and still are doing them.
Yep.
You can start to connect some dots where some of those marketing dollars came from is perhaps through USAID.
Yeah,
right.
That's an interesting. I didn't realize that, but it all makes sense. I would challenge anyone. If you want to fact check me on this, go ahead. But I would challenge anyone to show me one thing 15 years later that the Red Cross or the Clinton Foundation.
Yeah, that's another biggie that's probably going to get a pretty big flashlight on it in the 100%. Next several days.
Show me one thing that is still in Haiti that they did that is still there.
That's right.
Between the two organizations, they raised one was $500 billion, the other was or $500 million. Doggone it, I probably should fact check that because that's a big difference in number. I want to say $500 million each. So it's $1 billion between the Red Cross and the Clinton Foundation for Haiti, and there is nothing that I can see except for some really nice Land Rovers.
Wow.
I vividly remember I was at an NGO in Port-au-Prince, and we're just scraping by trying to build houses for, and parenthetically, go to Jacmel, Haiti if you can get in there, and you'll find at least 55 to 60 houses that are still standing with families living in it that were built by our little church of 150 people.
Wow.
But I would get into Port-au-Prince in this NGO, which is, it's not fair for me to name them, but had 2, and I mean brand spanking new, like Toby Mac Land Rovers. Stovepipes.
Oh, man.
Like still had the plastic on the seats from when they were in the shop, when they purchased them. They were like, in those days, like $90,000, $95,000 each. And 2 of them sitting in the parking lot, and he's driving me around, giving me a little tour, asking for money. Was sitting in this $95,000 Land Rover, and I actually stopped. It was like, I'm gonna be real honest with you. Both of our time is limited. I understand your time. This is not for us. This is just some. I didn't go into detail with him because he's just a guy on the ground in Haiti. He's a Haitian. He doesn't know. But I was like, if your organization thought buying a pair of brand new Land Rovers was a great use of money at this point, then I know this is not for us. And I would encourage anyone who is giving to an organization to trust but verify. Don't just blindly give. it's Red Cross, they do great work, but personally, I'm unwilling to give my money to organizations that are spending ridiculous money on salaries for CEOs, for projects. It just literally becomes capitalism in crisis. You see it every time. Like I learned it the hard way because when the earthquake happened and we were doing all this work in Haiti, I started getting calls from people that wanted to, quote, help. And then I realized, oh, you're trying to sell me things like, upcharging on water filtration systems. And it was like, oh, you're a salesperson. No, I don't have any time for you for that. We're trying to help people right here. So the capitalism in crisis is just one of the challenges that you'll face with it. But when you put it into a bloated $40 billion a year organization with no oversight whatsoever, it's going to be a disaster. So,
yeah, well, as we land this plane, I just wanted to mention there's a really good podcast that dives all the way in on this. For those of you that do listen to Rogan podcast, he had Mike Benz on a few months ago, BENZ, episode 2237. Mike Benz on the Rogan podcast details all of this, and he was ahead of it. Actually, this particular podcast put it on kind of the front line for Elon.
As far as USAID? Interesting.
Yeah. This guy has been the tip of the spear in bringing it to light over the past year.
Does he have a background somewhere in USAID, or how did he?
Yeah, yes, and I think he was former CIA as well.
Oh, yeah, he knows.
He is.
He knows.
Oh, yeah. What he is bringing to light, like the past 24 hours has been like the most glorious time of his life. He is celebrating. He's like, it's the biggest I told you so ever.
Yeah.
For him. And he's sharing through his X account, like there's more to come. So anyways, if you wanted to really nerd out, listen to that particular podcast because it just keeps going and going and going. Sunday, you are finishing up Jonah chapter 1.
Yeah.
All right. So we just kind of scratched the surface, the beginnings of the context of the book of Jonah through the first few verses here. Where does the rest of this chapter take us for this week?
Well, it takes us to the bottom of the sea.
Deeper. Kind of like the podcast.
You start to see a pattern in Jonah, and that is his obedience. I think it's 3 times in Jonah that he goes down. So the first 2 chapters is down, 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 like a burning ring of fire, down.
Yeah.
In disobedience. And so we're going to take another step down in his disobedience. And what is, if I were to sort of, I guess, attach a theme to it, is, I think I said it, but if you're willing to disobey God, sin will give you a ride to it. And it'll take you as far, was the old saying, further than you wanted to go, right, is where sin will take you. And with Jonah specifically, that was he decided, I don't want to do that. And I probably will talk about this, I think, on Sunday, but you listen to theologians, there's some theologians out there that will attach some motivations to Jonah that I don't think are fair. So like Tim Keller, rest his soul, he's in eternity, probably being rewarded greatly, but he would say that Jonah was a bigot. I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's accurate. I think Jonah didn't want the Assyrians, not because he's a bigot, but because he's a human. Like, he didn't want this terrifying regime of evil people. Like, he wanted revenge. It wasn't because he was a bigot. It's because he was a human, right? So I don't think it had anything to do with their race. It had everything to do with their, because that to me, that's where the DEI sneaks into the church world, is I'm trying to attach a modern synthesis to an ancient document. And the Bible nowhere says he's a bigot. The Bible doesn't even indicate that. It just says that he didn't want the Assyrians to be saved. And, when you think about that, you think all that, what a mean thing to say. But Osama bin Laden, right? You start, it becomes real when you start attaching real names to this. So he had a legitimate hole in his heart in that. Now, that said, God still wants to save, right? So that's where we're going to go with it, is like where disobedience took him, the effects that it had on these sailors around him. When you disobey, like sin gives you the ride. And part of what I'm going to cover a little bit, I think, is that, there were lots of voices in the boat, right? And if you've got a voice in the boat, your boat, that is leading you astray and leading you into sin, you might need to kick him out of the boat. So we'll talk about that on Sunday.
It's great. We dove into a lot today. Thanks for being on the ride with us in the boat as we go deeper. And if you missed this past week's teaching, you can find it on our podcast. You can find it on our YouTube channel. If you aren't subscribed to our YouTube channel, go ahead and push subscribe. Maybe leave a comment, leave a review. So grateful that you would spend time with us each and every week. We'll do it again next week.